A mother named Connie is living in a beautiful house with her loving family. As she is helping her son Charlie get ready for school, her husband Edward comes down, asking how he looks. Connie says he looks very handsome, and she kisses her before he and their son leave. Later that day, Connie heads to the city to buy the things needed for her son's upcoming birthday. The very strong wind makes it tough for the woman to traverse through the city until she accidentally crashes into a handsome French guy named Paul. Paul helps Connie pick her things up, and when he tries to hail a cab for her, no one would stop. He notices the bruises on the woman's legs, so the French guy suggests that she come to his place so he can give her a band-aid. At Paul's apartment, Connie goes to the bathroom to tend to her scratches. As she comes out, she notices the books piled all over his place. Connie asks to use the phone, and while she's on it, Paul can't help but stare at the beautiful legs of his guest. He later puts ice on it, which startled Connie. She later thanks him for his help, and before she leaves, Paul tells her that she can take a book with her as a souvenir. Later at home, Connie mentions meeting a nice guy to Edward, and her husband suggests sending a bottle of wine to thank him. Connie laughs it off, but considers it. That evening, while Edward is testing his new camera, Connie tries to seduce him until they become intimate. However, Charlie suddenly calls for them, interrupting their moment. The next day, while Connie is checking the book that Paul gave her, a piece of paper falls down, and written on it is the French guy's number. She decides to call him and asks for his address so she can send a bottle of wine as thanks. Paul asks her to come instead, and he will make her some coffee. Connie is hesitant at first, but then she eventually agrees. Arriving at Paul's apartment, the French guy helps Connie take off her coat. She notices a braille book, and Paul asks her to close her eyes while he helps her feel the pages. Even after closing the book, Paul still hasn't let go of Connie's hand, which prompts the woman to leave without even sipping the coffee. She then goes to Edward's office where she is greeted by her husband's secretary Bill. Connie surprises Edward with a shirt, and when the husband asks about the auction, the wife says she got a pledge from Bob, which impresses Edward. Later that night, as they finish dinner, Connie can't shake thoughts of the other man's apartment. Edward notices it, but did not question. The following day, Connie returns to Paul's apartment, this time bringing muffins. Paul helps her with her coat and leads her to slow music, but before things escalate, Connie realizes it's a mistake and leaves. However, she soon comes back after realizing she forgot her coat. This time, Paul embraces Connie and leads her to his bedroom, where Connie doesn't resist and the inevitable happens. The unfaithful wife soon goes home, feeling both happy and guilty at the same time. Meanwhile, Edward runs into Bob, and when he asks him about the auction, the man says he was out of town, so there's no way Connie talked to him about it. Later that night, the suspicious Edward acts strangely with Connie, asking if she loves him. Connie quickly responds yes, calming Edward down. Over the next few days, Connie lives a double life, playing the role of a good mother and wife with Charlie and Edward during social events. However, she continues her affair with Paul during the week. One day, Connie feels uncomfortable because she went with Paul to have lunch in public. Her lover bets on who will pay among two men nearby, saying that if he loses, they will immediately leave, and if he wins, he gets to kiss her. Connie realizes that the other man is Edward's secretary, Bill, so she tries to hide her face. However, since Paul won the bet, he gets to kiss her, and Bill witnesses it. Later that night, Connie enjoys a bath with Paul's music playing. When Edward joins her and tries to be intimate, Connie pulls away, claiming the water is cold, and leaves him in the tub. The next day, Edward suggests lunch together, but Connie tries to delay, mentioning she has auction errands. Edward notices a new dress and heels waiting for her, eyeing them suspiciously. Edward then tells Connie he'll wait for her to get ready so they can go to lunch together. She tells him that she has a facial appointment, so she can't go with him. Later that day, Edward calls the salon to confirm Connie's appointment, but finds out there's no appointment under her name, adding to his suspicions. After Edward goes to work, Connie heads to the city to meet Paul. On her way, she bumps into her old friends, and they invite her for coffee. Although Connie initially declines, she eventually gives in to their insistence. At the cafe, Connie calls Paul to inform him she'll be late due to meeting old friends. A few minutes later, Paul shows up and signals Connie to meet him in the back. Connie excuses herself from her friends and joins Paul. They engage in intimate behavior in the bathroom. When Connie returns from the bathroom, Tracy and Sally mention seeing a handsome man, and they point out Paul to Connie. Sally admits she would take a chance with a guy like him, but Tracy warns against it, hinting at her own failed affair. Tracy regrets her affair and wishes she could undo it. Meanwhile, Edward has to let Bill go because of his loyalty issues. The secretary begs not to fire him, but Edward says he should have been faithful to the company. Bill storms out of the office, angrily telling Edward to ask his wife about faithfulness. Edward is taken aback, and his suspicions grow stronger. Later that day, Edward meets an investigator named Frank and asks him to tail Connie to find out what she's been doing lately. During dinner that night, Edward announces he'll be flying to Chicago the next day. He also reveals to Connie that he fired Bill because he can't trust him anymore. Connie is surprised by the mention of trust but manages to compose herself. The following day, Edward quietly leaves for his trip to Chicago. Unbeknownst to Paul and Connie, Frank is secretly photographing them as they spend time together in the city. Connie becomes so engrossed in her affair that she forgets to pick up Charlie from school, and guilt begins to gnaw at her. The next day, Edward meets Frank at a secluded location where Frank hands over the incriminating pictures of Paul and Connie. Frank reveals Paul's name, apartment details, and the times Connie meets with him. Edward struggles to accept that his wife may be unfaithful, but the evidence in the photos is hard to ignore. One day, while shopping for groceries, Connie spots Paul with another woman, so she confronts them and makes a scene. As they head back to the apartment, Paul insists the other woman is just a friend, but Connie is furious. Connie tells Paul that their relationship is over, but Paul refuses to let her go. Despite Connie's attempts to resist, Paul holds onto her tightly and becomes intimate with her in the hallway. Later that day, Edward pays a visit to Paul. Paul is initially confused, but when Edward reveals that he is Connie's husband, everything clicks for Paul. Edward asks to come in, and Paul simply opens the door for him. Edward confronts Paul about their affair, and Paul is surprisingly honest in his responses. However, things take a turn when Edward notices a snow globe he had given Connie as a gift on Paul's side table. Overwhelmed with rage, Edward attacks Paul, hitting him repeatedly with the snow globe until Paul starts bleeding profusely. Paul dies from the injuries right there. When Edward regains his senses, he is horrified by what he has done. He cleans up the scene and deletes a voicemail Connie left for Paul where she is ending their affair. Edward then packs Paul's body into his trunk and drives to Charlie's school for his play, despite feeling shaken by the day's events. During the play, Edward and Connie lavish praise on their son. Afterward, Connie tells Edward she needs to stay to help in cleaning up, so Edward takes Charlie home. Later that night, while Connie and Charlie are asleep, Edward goes to the dump site and disposes of Paul's body there. The next morning, Edward appears worn out, which worries Connie. He asks his wife if she is happy, and he suggests that they move to the city. Connie says that she likes it here, and so Edward leaves for work. While he's away, the police arrive at their house, inquiring about Paul, who has been reported missing by his wife. Connie tells them she barely knew Paul and only intended to buy books from him, as he was a book dealer. Unsatisfied, the police leave empty-handed. On Charlie's birthday, the boy mentions the cops that visited the house. Edward asks his wife about it, and Connie says that somebody is missing. The husband asks who was it and why did the police talk to her. Connie answers that perhaps he had her number because she bought books from him. A few days later, the police return with news that Paul's body has been found. Connie is visibly distraught. They question where Connie met Paul, and she lies, claiming they met at an auction. Edward supports Connie's lie, and the police leave. Later that day, while sorting through Edward's clothes for dry cleaning, Connie discovers pictures of herself and Paul. She realizes that Edward knows about her affair. That night, Connie and Edward host a small party for their friends at their house. During the gathering, a guest holds up a snow globe, and Connie notices it, a gift she had given to Paul, now among their collection. In that moment, Connie and Edward exchange a significant look, and Connie realizes that Edward is the one who killed Paul. Later that night, after the guests leave, Connie confronts Edward. He confesses that he accidentally killed Paul, but claims that it was his wife whom he wants to kill. They both cry as they process the situation separately. A few days later, on a weekend, Edward teaches Charlie how to play the piano while Connie attends to household chores. Connie discovers a small compartment under the snow globe she had given to Paul. Inside, she finds a picture of her, Edward, and infant Charlie, a gift Edward left for their anniversary. They share a sad realization of the damage they've caused to their family. Later that day, Connie burns the pictures of her and Paul as she reflects on how things would have been different if she had made a different choice. Edward suggests turning himself into the police, but Connie refuses, opting to take things one day at a time and find a way to move forward. Life seems to return to normal for the couple. Edward excels at work, and Connie's auction business thrives. One night, on their way back from an auction, they stop at a red light. Connie suggests disappearing, moving to another country, and adopting new identities. She starts sobbing, and Edward comforts her because it turns out that they've stopped at the police station as the loving husband is ready to turn himself in. Did you like our movie recap? Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. To be updated for new movie recaps, hit the notification bell.